Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What was wrong with the worst hotel room you ever had?
Episode 2.
1. My girlfriend and I walked in after being gone all day and felt something wet on the floor. The lights were out, and it was nighttime, so we couldn't tell what it was. Turn on the lights to see if the toilet is just broken. Didn't overflow, the tank just cracked, and water was pouring everywhere. The entire bedroom and bathroom are soaked. Go down to let them know and request money back and cancel the room for that night. They offer us another room instead. Okay, sure. Walk into the new room, someone is already staying there. The poor woman looked horrified when we walked in. Got all our cash back after that and left. 2. There were elevators on each side of our hotel room. Both shafts had a loud bell that rang when the car arrived on the floor, plus, we could feel shaft vibrations in our bed. Not only did we hear the elevator doors opening and closing, with percussive bells, but hotel guests would often stand outside our room door talking in full voice during the night as they waited for their elevator to arrive. 3. Motel in Charlottetown, PEI. Our hotel room was in the basement down a long, dark hallway with half the bulbs burnt out and around 2 or 3 corners, was fully prepared to meet a murderer in the dark. Got into the room, whole bunch of stuff was duct taped together. Air conditioner duct taped in several places and duct taped into the window. The shower head was repaired with duct tape. Duct tape holding the couch and desk together. It was like being in Red Green's motel. For Roach here, I had just checked into the Comfort Inn in Kingsville, Texas, via the Roach reception. Got charged way too much, only to be told that I had to share a room with some other. What I'm a roach. I have been in some pretty gross situations, so I'm used to that sort of thing, and maybe they will end up being good and we will grab a few brewskis. I crawled in pretty tired and went to bed in the best place I could find. Next thing you know, I'm flying through the air half roasted and hit someone in the forehead. 2 out of 10 would not stay again. Although they had some pretty mean cupcake crumbs in the next room, they put me in, so it wasn't all bad. 5. We chose a ground floor hotel room in Cancun. Unfortunately, there was a gap on the bottom of the front door and the room was overrun by palmetto bugs. The things fly, they sound like little helicopters. My girlfriend woke me up asking what the sound was, turned on the light and they were on the floor, the walls, and on our bed. We literally just put on our clothes after shaking them out a few times and went through the balcony exit, went to the concierge, and demanded a room on the 4th floor. After they saw the room, they stopped arguing and comped us dinner and drinks, plus gave us a new room. 6. It was NYC in January. The window was jammed open, but the heat on it just about evened out at around 18 degrees in the room. The door had an extra interior bolt on it because the key cards weren't secure. We found this out at 3 a.m. when a kind security guard woke us up to ask if this door is supposed to be wide open. No. The water ran brown and at one point and wouldn't shut off. I ran to get someone and found a housekeeper. English was her second language, but she spoke it fine. The trouble was that I'm Scottish, and in my blind panic I forgot the word faucet and kept saying the tap broke, water is coming, oh god, the tap, and she kept saying tap, tap, and tapping on objects in utter confusion. By the time we got to the room it was minutes away from flooding over the side of the tub. None of that compared to our friends down the hall, who found the word murder written on their window. When they tried to wipe it off it was written backwards on the outside, and the window was stuck shut. Majestic Hotel. 7. Business trip. Took a non-smoking room. The room smelt of smoke. The bathroom overflowed and the water flowed out and made the carpet wet. Added to the dank smell. Tried to fix the bathroom situation because housekeeping never arrived. Found out that a futon of hair was clogging the drain. Never managed to get all the hair out. There was no internet in my room. The only place that had a strong enough signal was in my toilet. Did not have a data plan as I arrived late. Had to do my work on the bowl. The toilet couldn't flush and was clogged. No hot water. So, I had to boil water. To shower. Best part. And here's a life tip. Check the minibar to see if any of the alcohol bottles or snacks are opened up. I was charged for a bag of nuts and a mini wine that I did not open. After I paid for it, the receptionist quickly tried to put it in the bin. No. Give it to me. Tossed it in the trash in the lobby, in full view of them. 8. Went to Vegas for a wedding, stayed in Luxor. Having only ever passed through Vegas, I had assumed that everything would be of a certain level of quality, right? I mean, I have seen the Luxor in plenty of movies and TV shows, always looks like a nice, iconic place to stay. My wife and I got our key and went to wait at the inclinator. Only one of them seemed to be working, and there was a large group of people waiting to use it. As we're waiting for it to arrive, we start hearing a horrible grinding noise, accompanied by some rhythmic banging. It didn't take us long to realize that the noise was coming from the elevator we were about to step into. The doors opened and some people got off, looking like they'd each just survived a terrorist attack. We reluctantly entered the elevator and some people even got back off, saying they were nervous about the wait. One guy had wanted to get off, but his wife made him stay. He then muttered, "Lord Jesus, this is it, forgive me for the duration of the ascent." We exited the longest and most terrifying elevator journey of our lives next to a garbage can, atop which was a half-empty glass of scotch that had become an ashtray for about 400 people. It was then that we realized that our room was on the exact opposite side of the floor from the elevators. On our long walk we noticed dozens of food service trays outside of doors, and some on abandoned carts which had started to gather flies. We got to our room, and I flopped onto the bed, exhausted, while my wife inspected the air conditioner that sounded like it was about to be the reason the Luxor burned to the ground. While I lay on the bed trying to let go of my travel anxiety, I noticed that the comforter had a very peculiar smell. I asked my wife to come take a whiff and offer her analysis. She leaned in close and sniffed, immediately recoiling, and grabbing the phone. I'll never forget my wife's face as she explained to the front desk, "We need new comforters up here." 9. Found myself stranded in a small town in Colombia. I asked a police officer for the cheapest place to stay. He pointed me in one direction but also suggested the second cheapest hotel. I dismissed his suggestion figuring I'd be leaving early the next day. I went down into a basement and knocked on a metal door and this elderly woman let me in but was surprised that I wanted to stay. I asked her how much for the night and it took a minute for her to calculate it. We start walking to the room and from the room next door emerges a guy and a hooker. The guy pays the old woman for the hour room rental, and I realized where I was staying. The room had a plywood bed with a blanket for a mattress and used condoms in the trash. There were earrings on the sink and the shower was just a pipe in the wall. I fell asleep on top of the bed to the sweet sound of Colombians copulating. 10. Some seedy place in Montreal. The whole place stunk of cigarette smoke, but the icing in the cake was that someone came into the room and switched on the light during the night, waking me up. I was sleeping and was too scared to move. I was 20 and spending my first night in Canada, so I just stayed perfectly still while the person stood at the door. After probably 20 seconds, the light went off and they disappeared. Left on a bus to Quebec City early the next morning, so never found out what it was to do with. On our way back from a trip to Canada, my friends and I stopped at a Motel 6 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was by far the cheapest room we had booked for the entire trip, and we were already wary of it before we even started seeing all the anti-meth billboards lining the highway leading up to it. It had been a long, boring day of driving and we figured it wouldn't much matter. We pulled into the parking lot to a shouting match between a car full of people and the management. We kind of sat there, building up our nerves before the driver hopped into his car and peeled out of the lot. We eventually claimed our room and went to get situated. We ignored the crumbs on the floor and set our things down, too road-weary and hungry to really care. We found a menu for a pizza delivery place in our room, Godfather's I think it was called, and got that sorted out before one of us had to use the toilet. The bathroom was just filthy in general, but there was a dirty, used bandage on the floor and a bra hanging on the hook on the back of the door. I think any normal person would have left, but we were young, tired, and figured we'd just tough it out. For some reason it didn't occur to us that the bed sheets might be similarly soiled. We went outside to smoke while waiting for the pizza to show up and wandered around a bit. They had a basketball hoop that had been dunked on so hard, the hoop was practically parallel to the board, as well as missing a net, but we didn't have fun handy anyway, so it was no great loss. After a few minutes we saw the manager hastily walk by, followed by someone who we assumed to be a customer. He was speaking in what seemed to us like an official sort of tone, and we just sort of figured someone less hardy than ourselves had complained about their room. The manager was basically a skinny version of that neckbeard guy meme. Bad acne, glasses, ponytail, etc. The woman following him was rather unpleasant looking, morbidly obese, and wearing gray sweatpants and a Tweety Bird t-shirt. They both disappeared into a room, thinking she was showing him what a mess it was in there, and forgot about them for a while. Not 5 minutes later, they both came out of the room holding hands and smoking cigarettes. So, yes. Motel 6 in Kalamazoo. Can't say I recommend it. 12. The worst hotel room I had was in India. The whole room was covered in a layer of dust and dirt, and the electricity kept going off random times of the day and the ceiling fan would turn off. I stayed in because the heat made me sick, and that ceiling fan was my only hope. The shower was also broken and kept spraying everywhere, and there were pigeons right outside the windows, so at all times of day and night I kept hearing wings and cooing. If you travel in India, shell out the extra money for a more expensive hotel room. 13. One of them that comes to mind. My girlfriend and I decided too late to spend a couple of days at the beach, and being in full season, all the charming hotels were either full or really expensive at this point. The one we found was rated 2 stars and was relatively cheap. We thought, well, it can't be all that bad. When we arrived at the hotel, the housekeepers were still cleaning the room as we had to wait for a while. After they finished, we got in and it was still filthy. Crumbs all over the floor and bed, the furniture peeled and dirty, the sheets stained with all colors of what a human being is capable of creating. Won't go into what the bathroom looked like, because there aren't enough words to describe it. I will however talk about the balcony. It was a lake. It was filled with water and moss growing in it. I looked around for the drain, but there was nothing to see. I thought this is an idiocy, but still wouldn't believe it. So, I leaned over the edge to see if there's the drain pipe on the outside that came out of the balcony. It was there, but on the inside everything looked smooth in the water. I found a stick and scraped the spot until the drain hole started to show. The water started pouring out and the day was saved. I ruined what nature was trying to build on that balcony for what appeared to me to be years. The view was nice though. 14. I've always had pleasant experiences with hotels, so unfortunately no gross weird stories from me. The worst experience I ever had was when I was traveling and ended up staying at a place halfway to my destination. I was in my room just hanging out. Ordered a pizza from the place on the pamphlet on my bed and waited for it to arrive. I got a call from the pizza delivery guy apologizing and saying he didn't think he could deliver my food. I asked why, genuinely curious and awaiting a delightful story about how he ate it or something. No, he said there were about 30 guys in the parking lot having a fist fight. I walked outside, looked down from the balcony and watched about 30 guys duke it out. The pizza guy walked the long way and brought me my pizza. I tipped him big for being a bro and taking the long way, and we watched these guys beat the stuff out of each other. Pizza guy left. I sat down to eat pizza back in my room and decided to call the police, because, well, someone should. I guess. I ended the call and went back to watching TV. Pizza was bad. Did a long-term stay at a really old motel converted into temporary housing in Oklahoma. Across from a cemetery. Never got colder than 85 F inside, tarantulas and the occasional snake outside the only exit. Rampant with mice that did not mind crawling on the stove or up your phone charger into your bed. I ended up putting steel wool under the legs of the bed and the kitchen table and sprinkling cat hair around those areas taken from the local liquor store cats. Bleached everything constantly. Took power naps in the car when I could. 16. When I checked myself in, the clerk handed me the remote control for the TV in the room. I thought that was strange, but whatever. When I walked into the room, there was a fly swatter, just in case we needed it. The water was brown, and everything was dingy. The worst part was that there were only 2 hotels in the city, and the one we were staying in was supposedly the good one. 17. Last-minute Vegas road trip on Memorial Day weekend. All the hotel rooms were booked, so we stayed at this small motel on the corner of the strip. The room was basically made for prostitutes. The TV played the police radios that were in the area. We just put our stuff in there, went out, came back in the morning, and left. 18. It was at a Greek mythology-themed casino/hotel resort in Macau, China, the Asian Las Vegas, pretty much, and the hotel was shut down recently due to public safety concerns. Anyways, so it was our first night in the city and my family and our cousins checked into the hotel. Having been to Vegas-themed hotels, I expected at least a similar quality, but the hallways were dark and shabby, with a tad smell of liquor and cigarettes in the air. And this was just the beginning. The showers were dark and there was long black hair on the shower floor, not unlike a horror movie. The TV was an old box that played in black and white and very static in color. This was 2014, at a resort. Then the final straw came when my dad moved the sofas to make small beds for our cousins, and there was what looked like a shotgun hole hidden by the sofa and a used condom, still leaking the lustful fluids from those before. Our uncle arrived too the next day and set us up in the much nicer 5-star Venetian, smiley face. 19. While we were in Egypt, one of my friends found a small green lizard in his room. He got closer and closer to it, but it didn't move. So, he tried talking to it. "Hello, Mr. Lizard." No response, of course, so he then decided to poke it with a pen because he was clearly asleep. The problem is Mr. Lizard wasn't asleep, he was definitely dead. When he poked it, its belly stuck to the carpet and all his guts spilled out. Oh Nook! Mr. Lizard. 20. So, at one of the low moments, I was forced out of desperation to stay at the Dahlia Hotel in the Tenderloin District in SF, $60 a night. San Francisco is full of fleabag hotels, but this was the worst one I have ever stayed in. The first thing I noticed was that there was a sharps disposal unit on the wall in the hallway. I realized at that moment that I was better off sleeping in a park, but it got worse when I got to the room. It was just one dirty bed in a tiny room, with no other sort of furniture. There were blood stains and cigarette burn on the single blanket provided. There was one communal bathroom for each floor, which was just a grimy toilet, no sink. The lock was broken on my floor's bathroom, and the way the door was hung it would just swing open if you didn't reach across and hold it shut while you did your thing. The light was also burned out. I didn't get much sleep that night, partly because there was some girl shouting for hours up at someone on the 3rd floor to let her get her stuff. The police officers were called and took her away. Years later I saw a documentary on black tar heroin in SF and realized that much of it was filmed in the Dahlia. There is also a lot of prostitution that goes on in the building, and if they know you as a pimp you can rent the rooms by the hour. I have no idea how that place has not been shut down and is still in operation. The film was made in the early 90s. SF is a crazy place. 21. Hotel in Vietnam. We were really scraping by till the next paycheck and found this backstreet room for $10. We went in, there were bars on the windows and a lock on the outside of the door. All my spidey nope senses went crazy, but my partner really needed to sleep. I let her sleep whilst I wedged the door open and sat watching the doorway. My life being sold as a drug mule flashed in front of my eyes for about 5 hours. 22. No-Tell Motel in Amarillo, Texas. Advertised $14.99 rooms on billboards coming into town. This was super cheap in 1985. I was on a solo motorcycle trip and had been camping, so I needed a bath and a real bed. Pulled in at about 11 p.m. and got a room. I walked in the room, tossed my gear on the little table, then took my boots off and walked to the bathroom. Bathroom light sent several roaches skittering. Yuck, but for a cheap room, expected. Walked back to bed and started to take off my socks when I saw that they were all greasy and black on the soles. Weird, but I had done an oil change a couple of days prior and thought some of my old oil must have leaked into my boots. Crashed hard asleep in the bed, slept well despite several sirens and loud voices in the night. Woke up to daylight in the room and saw bloodstains on the bedspread. The sheets were a kaleidoscope of stains. The carpet was more grease and filth than carpet. There was a used hypodermic needle with sharp end bared embedded in the carpet. Only found one condom wrapper, and thank God, no soiled prophylactics. At $14.99 I felt a bit ripped off and told the clerk as I checked out. She seemed more curious than I actually checked out and turned in my key. I got the feeling that their typical guest usually overstays and has to be evicted or ends up leaving in an ambulance or coroner's meat wagon. My vacation plans since then have never included stops in Amarillo, Texas. 23. The hostel I booked while in Paris gave my bunk away to someone else cause it was peak season for travelers. The place wasn't that great anyway. Now I'm hustling to find accommodation and eventually find a room in a hotel in Clichy. Well, I get there, and the front desk man is just being a total odd to me. Then he says that he doesn't have his key to my room, so he has to keep mine and will have to let me in whenever I need to be let in. Red flag number 1. I get up to my room and it's a small cubicle with a sink in it. Not so bad I suppose until I look at the sheets. There are literal human feces smeared on the mattress and sheets. I told the front desk, and he does nothing about it. Red flag number 2. I took my sheets and tossed them out the window. I then decided to go find food, but everything was closing except this kebab shop with a few surly-looking gentlemen. I, an average pale Irishman, walk in and they all kind of stare at me as if I don't belong. I regret my decision for a minute but press on and ask the gentleman behind the counter if he is still open and if I could get some good. He smiled and apologized, but he had just closed, but he came out from behind the counter, walked me down the street and found me a place that was open and set me up with a free meal and said, "Enjoy your meal, I am sorry, I couldn't feed you myself." I was grateful for his generosity and ate slowly so I didn't have to go back to my hotel. Well, after wasting so much time I finally meandered back to my room, moved the wardrobe in front of my door. Pull out my sleeping bag and curl up in it on the floor. Worst place ever. Didn't enjoy Paris all too much. Packed up and headed for greener pastures in Switzerland where I had a fun time. 24. I once got to my hotel in Abu Dhabi, the place my customer had recommended right across the street from his office. I walk in, and the lobby is full of people from the 2 nightclubs in the hotel. It also smells a bit like smoke, but I chalked that up to the clubs. I got checked in, and as I was walking to the elevator to go to my room, I was approached by a woman asking me if I wanted a massage. I declined, moved on, and was approached by a different woman with a similar offer while waiting for the elevator. Then I got to my room. It looked perfectly serviceable but smelled like the place where ashtrays go to die, and yes, it was a non-smoking room. It was also directly above one of the nightclubs and sounded like it. That was enough for me. Hotel crawling with hookers plus stinky room plus club noise equals nope. Walked back down to the front desk, told them to tear up my credit card receipt, and called the Hilton down the street from the taxi. 25. My grandparents got a motel room in Washington, D.C. during a cross-country road trip. They put their things in the room then went to dinner. They came back to find a man sleeping on the bed over the covers. He awoke when they came in and dashed out. Where he was laying, there was a mixture of blood and feces. He didn't take anything, and they got a room somewhere else. 26. It was in an old, probably haunted, monastery in France. The hot water stopped working while I showered, and the lights flashed later. Obviously, the mattress was as hard as a rock. But the worst part was when I was about to go to bed, I saw the biggest spider of my life at the very top of the wall, which was super tall so I couldn't do anything about it. February 10th, would not recommend. 27. Now I'm slightly cynical when it comes to the paranormal, but I once stayed in a definitely haunted and creepy hotel room in Winchester. The hotel itself seemed perfectly alright upon arrival, if not a bit dark and dusty. But such is the way with many English hotels. As soon as I opened the door to my room, everything felt really off, and I got a sudden wave of chills. Like a feeling of anxious anticipation, or the feeling something was watching me. I can't really explain it, but I just felt really unnerved. The room itself was bloody creepy in terms of decor. The walls were blood red, with a super high ceiling, and filled with creepy-ass portraits of Victorian children. There must have been at least 20 paintings in that room, and each child seemed to have their eyes fixed on you, like some weird Scooby-Doo shenanigan. The heating was on, and the windows all closed, but I constantly felt chilled, and the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I tried to tell myself I was paranoid until the bathroom door incident. I was on the bed, on my phone, facing the closed ensuite bathroom door, when the handle moved down on its own, and the door pushed forward and opened. I freaked out but told myself it was a draft etc. I went to close the door after a shocked moment of silence, just to check if it was possible it had blown open etc. Now this door, I found, was massively heavy, and the handle was really stiff. How did that push down on its own accord? Thoroughly freaked out, it took me ages to settle that night. Now I suffer quite frequently from sleep paralysis. I know when it's coming, and more often than not I can deal with it and separate reality from my mind. But that night I had the worst sleep paralysis of my life. It was constant, and vivid, and more horrible than any paralysis I'd had before. I swear to God the presences I felt were made of a very real, very malicious energy. It was bizarre. Again, I'm a cynic, but something was very wrong with that room. So yes, if I'm ever in Winchester again, I know where to avoid. 28. A friend of mine was moving from Nevada to Alaska. I helped him with the move and drove the 3,500-ish miles to his new place. The journey took 5 days, and we stayed in a variety of places along the way. The worst one was this really small place somewhere in Canada. The room had a funk to it, but no big deal, it's just one night. So, while watching some UFC he gets up and says, "Dude, is your butt wet?" Naturally my first reaction is, "Defo you are talking about," but sure enough I got up and realized my butt is wet. Of course, the first thing you do in this scenario is put your nose to the bed and smell that spot. It was passed on the bed. Both of them. He calls the front desk, and they send up the housekeepers. What do? They turn the mattresses over. Call the front desk again. They gave us a different room. WTF Canada? 29. Mold in the bathroom. Thought the tub was naturally beige, but no, that was just dirt and grime that caked on for years. The second bed was a let-out sofa, which was horribly mildewed. In the age of cable and dish service, the motel relied on over-the-air channels. The TV was the type that had dials. This was in the mid-90s. The soap had previously been used, rewrapped. There was pubic hair on the bed. There were porn mags under the bed. 30. Not per se wrong, different. After a trip from my home country, the Netherlands, I arrived in a hotel in Mumbai, India, and I wanted to take a refreshing shower, but the shower was just an empty room. I went to the receptionist to say I had no shower. The receptionist then pointed at the tap and bucket, and the scoop in the bucket. That was the shower. There was only icy water BTW. Smiley face. I didn't complain. I went to India to experience a new country, so I did. Smiley face. 31. My son, my wife, and I were looking for a place to sleep, and there were two motels right across from one another. They were Motel 8 or a Motel 6, or something like that. The first one, we couldn't stay in. They weren't full or anything, but there was something wrong with their computer or something. So, we went over to the one across the street. Walk in, and the place doesn't look great, but we don't really care. So, we start to check in, and the lady behind the desk looks just a little tired and angry, but that's kind of what you expect. So, we're checking in, and every once in a while behind us, there's this woman who's just poking her head out from behind the wall. Hey, eyes are all bugged out, and she's got some serious meth face going on. So, we get all that stuff sorted, and then the woman who was behind us comes up and says here. Okay. I'll show you to your room. And she's got this high-pitched voice and talks really fast. She's just about bouncing off the walls too. So, she takes us down there, talking a mile a minute about nothing and bouncing all over the place. Lets us in, and the room is the kind of nasty you'd expect. Everything is just dingy and lightly stained. And then I look at the pillows, and one of them is just covered in some brown stuff. Blood, or diarrhea, or something else awful. So, I pick this thing up gingerly and walk it back up to the front desk. I came up and told the front desk lady. The bouncy girl, before sticks her head out, looks at the pillow. Then says, well, you can use mine. And dashes off. In a couple seconds, she's back with another pillow. Now you can have it, but you got to bring it back. Okay, sure. You got to remember to bring it back before you leave tomorrow. Still going a mile, a minute. So, then I walked back to my room with my new, but still questionable, pillow. That was a weird night. 32. We went to Rome with our school, and we naturally had a cheap hotel. Apparently I and some friends got the worst room, as ours smelled like a very filthy old home. What was worse was that there was an improvised bathroom within our room, which somehow managed to smell even worse. That bathroom smelled like old, moldy vomit. We also had some cockroaches, but not too many. 33. My parents and I went to Florida for my brother's college graduation. We shared a room. First, in order to get to the room, you had to walk through a door which led you to another hallway with another door at the end. This door was much smaller and the following hallway even smaller. It felt like Alice in Wonderland. Trippy. Next we got to the room. There's a couch and then a door that folds in the middle of the room like an accordion to block the room with the bed. However, once closed it would not open unless you jiggled the whole door and made a lot of noise. Lastly, there were no windows. There was a half window that didn't open in the bathroom right below the ceiling. Pointless. It was really unsure, but we were just there to sleep so it did the trick fine. 0/5 stars though. Would never go back. 34, was staying at a hotel in CT that had seen better days. Got booked into a room. The linens were gross, stained, but there was a clean blanket in the closet, so I just slept in that rolled up burrito style on the bed. I had to get up at 4 a.m. for a friend's wedding and it was just one night, so I figured it wouldn't be important. Then I ended up with the hell neighbors. They were watching TV with a barking chihuahua until 1 a.m. Then the chihuahua barked all night at every noise, wind blowing, person walking past, ghost sneezing, aka nothing. It was miserable. I probably slept for 10 seconds all night long. But, for the people with an odd dog. When I woke up at 4 a.m. to start getting ready for the wedding, I was in it, hence why I had to be up so early. I played Randy Houser, the most obnoxiously country singer on planet Earth, right next to that paper-thin wall, so they were treated to a non-stop barking country music fest for 45 minutes from 4 to 4:45 a.m. Side note, I hope those men got hit by a bus the next day. 35. When I went to India earlier this year, the hotel we stayed at in Ludhiana didn't have air filters, which meant we got smog directly in our rooms. I would go down into the lobby every morning, and there was a cloud of smog hanging there. We had a few people in our group who were already sick, and the air made it even worse, to the point where 2 of them had to go home early, while everyone else who wasn't ill came down with something. 36. The national park was a much longer drive than we thought, and we didn't know we needed reservations, so we had to stay 2 nights. The first was really cheap, which was important at the time, and didn't look all that bad. The door wouldn't unlock, so we got the woman from the desk to try. She couldn't unlock it either, so she shouted something, and a small brown boy came running from the office. He climbed through the window, and opened the door, after which it seemed to work. The mattress sat in an old waterbed frame on concrete blocks. The bathroom light didn't work. It's harder than you think to take a shower in the dark, wondering what else might be in there. And the toilet was in a sort of alcove that was narrow enough for my SO's hips to touch both sides. We discovered the next day that the hotel in the park was NPS price controlled, so only $10 more. We promptly moved. My other classic was a decent room near another national park. The shower was a concrete block cell that had been stucco, then covered with tan vinyl wallpaper when the stucco wasn't waterproof enough. Before the days of camera phones, unfortunately, it was a unique sight. 37. About a decade ago, I stayed at a place that is generally known as Britain's worst hotel. This article sums it up pretty well. There was only 1 bulb out of the 4 spotlights working, throwing an eerie shadow across the room. Peering out of the window at the view, I yanked shut the curtains rather than look at all the broken fridges littering the car park. Looking around for somewhere to hang my coat, I saw that a door was missing from the wardrobe. Even the 1970s blue and green flowery wallpaper didn't want to stay in peeling strips. Bizarre. Not trusting the room's lock, I pushed the smelly fridge up against the door and fell asleep until 2 a.m. when I woke up to a sound like a body being dragged down the stairs. Several years later, the owners were arrested on suspicion of allowing the hotel to be used for child prostitution. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go take a shower. 38. I stayed in a hostel in Kyoto that was maybe the worst death trap I've ever been in. To get to my room on the 2nd floor, I had to pass through a hallway made up of wooden pallets for flooring and bordered by a dining room that was literally just a bare room with a picnic table in it to my left and a washing basin for laundry on my left. Then I looked up. Turns out the hallway was really just an alleyway between 2 buildings that had put sheet metal over the gap to create the impression of a ceiling. Anyway, there was a set of stairs that I had to walk up to get to my room, but between the alleyway there was a ton of clotheslines, so I had to walk through tons of wet sheets to actually get in my room. The door of the room was cardboard, naturally, and when I opened it I saw a room the size of the single-sized mattress that was in it and nothing else. No cabinet/dresser/etc., just a mattress and a pillow and a weird glass door covered with a mysterious curtain. Anyway, after a day or so there I dared to peek behind it, and I found out that my room was actually a closet for someone's apartment that was above the main hostel. And it rained most of my time there, so my cardboard door warped, and it was about 45 degrees Fahrenheit at night, but luckily I just slept in my clothes and jacket and was fine. Anyway, Kyoto is amazing, but stay the hell away from the Uno house. 39. My so and I stayed with his family at a hotel once for the anniversary of a family friend. It was nowhere near as bad as some of the things posted in here already, but my so and I had a room directly over a string of nightclubs. This was the year that Gangnam Style was taking the world by storm, and I had to listen to it booming below for hours overnight. At around 4 a.m., I heard So singing along under his breath, "Heresy lady." This is when I knew that he had probably lost his mind. I managed to pass out shortly after, then woke up 3 hours later to discover our window was open and wouldn't shut, the room was freezing and it was raining in on my so. Oh yes, and a random man walked in on my sleeping Mael during that visit. 40. I had my suspicions about the place from the rutted driveway, and the holes big as cannonballs in the lobby wainscoting gave me pause to take my key. But it was not until I had unpacked in the room, disengaged the television, and drifted into slumber that the hotel's true nature revealed itself. I awoke in the middle of the night, conscious of some stirring. I fumbled for the lights, chased the shadows, and found myself faced with rats on every appreciable surface. Rats on the dresser. Gangs of rats on the floor. Rats across the bathroom tiles. Rats cavorting on the minibar. Rats tangled in the key basket. Rats making nests of the brochures. Rats picnicking on the bedsheets. Naturally, I kept my wits about me. I leaned past the nightstand and took up my backpack, which I am never without, and opened the outer pocket. Inside I kept my emergency kit, and inside that, a small whistle. Now, I may have mentioned elsewhere that I apprenticed in Hamelin. There I was briefly mentored by a street musician of some renown, and after I bested him in a drinking contest, he consented to teach me the art of herding rats with the power of music. He cautioned me never to use anything but a flute, but alas, I had left my flute in the jungles of Borneo. A whistle would have to do. I played as gentle a melody as I could coax from the harsh chamber of the whistle, and by, the rats began to settle. Then I set up a bright marching air, rose from the sheets, and began to lead my rats, and indeed, as I passed, the rats of the building directly down the street, to my car, across town, to the health inspector's office, where I and the 7,000 rats signed affidavits to the effect that the building was unfit for occupation. If you don't believe me, you may go down to their offices directly. There they will present you with a formal document bearing my signature as well as 7,000 paw prints. And so, my tale is concluded. Another Askreddit assiduously addressed by the adventuring aristocrat, Baron Munchausen. Tally ho! 41. Got a hotel room for a night in NYC that was $150 a night, steep for me, so I didn't expect the Ritz-Carlton. What I got was a room so small that the double bed took up 75% of the room, and you had to crawl over the bed to get into the tiny bathroom. The view was of a brick wall. The carpet crunched like there was tissue paper under it. I ran out of toilet paper, there was only one tiny roll, and no one at the desk spoke enough English to understand what I needed. All the staff was Eastern European of some type, so I had to go to Duane Reade at 2 a.m. and buy my own. 42. About 5 years ago, I was a couple of days in Karlsruhe on business. I was staying at a rather ordinary 2- or 3-star hotel close to the train station. The room was a little drab, with decor from the early 70s, but it was relatively clean, and that was good enough, or so I thought. My first night in the hotel, I returned to my room after having dinner with some colleagues. Entering my room, I was overcome with an ice-scalding sensation. It was as if the air in my room had turned acidic. It took me some moments to realize that this was in fact real and not something I was imagining. I ran out of my room, closing the door behind me. The hotel front desk was staffed by an overdressed lanky German man who was a dead ringer for Lurch from the Addams family. Lurch was not interested in my tale of a room full of poisonous fumes. I'm not sure if he simply didn't understand my English, or if it were just innate arrogance that no such thing could happen in his efficiently run hotel. However, after much discussion, he agreed to see the room. At my room, Lurch marches confidently in while I carefully wait a safe distance from the door. He made it about 3 steps inside before making a swift U-turn and running out doubled over and spluttering. You can't sleep in there," he stammered. As the revelation set in, I was actually telling the truth. Needless to say, I got another room, but that was still my worst hotel experience thus far. For those interested, I think the problem was sulfur dioxide leaking from the old mini fridge in the room. I hate to think what would have happened if I were asleep when the leak started. 43. This was in Niagara Falls. We were staying at this place that looked really nice, had a large spacious room. Well, turns out this place wasn't that nice. It was an ugly building, I thought it was. When we got there, the bellman didn't offer to take our bags or even hold the doors open for us, and the lobby was about half the size of my bedroom. The elevators were slow, loud, and dingy. The hallways were about 4 feet wide and smelled like moose urine. And the stench continued into the room. There were barely any lights in it, and the bathtub had a ring of rust and a clump of hair in it. Needless to say, we requested a full refund. The staff was very friendly, in keeping with the Canadian stereotype, gave us our money back, and we moved down to the Hilton. Now that place is the best. We did wind up waiting 2 hours to check in since the computers were down though, so they gave us a room upgrade. Turns out it was so high up that our ears popped in the elevators. 33 floors up, in fact. We had a panoramic view of the falls, the other place had a panoramic view of a dumpster and a separate bedroom. And we got it for like $500 off because of the check-in wait. I think it was originally 1,200 Canadian dollars a night. The only unfortunate thing is that the fire alarm went off at 4 in the morning one night and we had to run down 33 flights of stairs, but it turned out to be a false alarm. Still though, it was easily one of the best hotels we've visited yet. 44. Every possible thing that could have gone wrong with my wedding went wrong. That's a story for another day. That night I had booked us into a heritage hotel we had never been in but had always been fascinated by. The front desk area looked shabby but clean and I knew they weren't able to completely remodel due to their heritage status, so I wasn't worried. My husband went to park the car and I went up to the room with our overnight bag. The hallways were dark, long, and narrow. The wallpaper, what I could see from it, was grimy, and the carpet was stained. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, and there were so many turns. I was so tired it felt a bit like a nightmare, and while it's cliché to say so, it felt like the Overlook. I finally found the room. The bedspreads are decades old. The floor is dirty. The furniture is 1970s at the earliest. The stench of ammonia was so strong, it made my eyes water. I go back to the front desk and tell them I can't stay in that room due to the smell. My husband comes in and we get keys to the presidential suite. The clerk assures me that I won't have any complaints about this room, it's their best. Back through the maze of corridors and into the presidential suite. There were whole pieces of wallpaper hanging off the walls. A moldy smell. Dust on the bed. Bugs. Then the refrigerator kicked in with a loud hum. I sat down, defeated, and started to cry. My husband, determined that something was going to go right, stormed down to the front desk, gave the guy hell, and got us a room at a nearby Delta, which was nothing fancy, but by God it was clean. 45. I was driving up to Narrows, Virginia, Google Maps it, there's nothing around there, and needed to get a hotel. Usually when I had to go up there I would just leave early in the AM, but this time I was already out that way, so I decided to try and find a hotel nearby so I could get started early the next day. I can't remember the name of the town I stopped in, it was just outside of Narrows, but there were only 3 motels. I drove around and checked all of them, all equally run down in the style where it is 2 stories tall with doors to each room on the exterior of the building. Since they all sucked, I went with the one with the best name, the Rendezvous Inn. Let's see. First, to check in I went to the office and there was a sign saying to go to room 108 to check in. So, I walk down to the room and knock on the door. There's a fat man in a wife beater and tiny shorts sitting on a bed eating ravioli and watching Fox News. I fill out a piece of paper and he gives me a key. I walk up to my room and the place is tiny and disgusting. If I were adventurous enough to lay on the dirty floor and stretch out, I could have probably touched one wall with my hands and another wall with my feet. The room had a twin bed and an old CRT TV. The heat was provided by a heater design I've never seen before or since, just a dial that you could turn on which would cause a coil of wires to glow red and emit heat. The coils were in a gap in the wall where they had popped out a cinder block or something. Probably why the place burned down a year later. I remember I sat on the bed watching a Republican debate and drinking, so it must have been in 2012. Anyway, the pillows were dirty, the blanket was really thin. I woke up the next morning and took about 15 showers, and then when I got to work I told the customer they'd never see me this early again. Runner-up would be a hotel in South Carolina where there were mirrors above the bed and on each of the walls. There was another place I stayed at in rural VA where the pillows were covered with nasty stains, and someone had drawn a creepy face with Sharpie on the pillow. The room smelled like musty mildew and cigarette smoke. I had to run out to a nearby dollar store to buy a candle and can still remember that the only place to eat nearby was a really, really bad pizza place. Another hotel I stayed at once had a big poop stain on the sheets. There were 2 queen beds, so I just slept on the other bed, but I made sure to send my mom a picture because she was a huge germaphobe and it drove her absolutely nuts that I stayed in the room. The life of someone who travels for work is not glamorous. 46. Didn't stay at one, but I used to work for a hotel chain, up at the front desk. Just clocked on when a young couple with a newborn came up to the desk with the most disgusted/horrified faces plastered on. Apparently they had walked in, and it was smeared all over the walls and bed, and vomit covering the TV. I went to check it out and sure, destroyed the room. I apologized profusely, gave them their money back and moved them into a new room for the night, and called my manager to let her know what happened. This one threatens to fire me because I gave them their money back and claims that they probably did it themselves to get a free room. They had just arrived when I had. She then demands that I go get them to clean the room and put them back in it. Obviously, I wasn't going to do that and just sent her boss an email explaining the situation. She got in a lot of trouble, but still took about 4 more months of straight retardation from her before she got booted. 47. My hotel room wasn't ready until 2 hours past the check-in time. At that point, the bathroom still hadn't been cleaned. When I came back from dinner an hour and a half later, occupying the room for the first time at 6:30 p.m., the door was propped open, but the room was finally ready. Except it had no toilet paper, so I went to the front desk to get some, at which point the manager, Denny, rather than taking the blame on behalf of the institution, berated the housekeeper right in front of me. When I got back with my toilet paper, the lock was broken. The key would make it beep, but then it wouldn't open. Denny told me I was doing it wrong, and had a housekeeper demonstrate the locks to me. The lock was still broken. Denny told me that the housekeeper and I were both doing it wrong and tried to demonstrate the locks to me. The lock was still broken. Denny accused my fiancé, still in the room, of having thrown the bolt, then stormed off when we demonstrated that this was not the case. Denny completely ignored me for 10 minutes while I stood in front of him demanding a new room, to the point of answering the phone twice while I was mid-sentence. I was given a new room in the middle of the do not enter construction area. It had no furniture. I was then given another room in the construction area that did have furniture. The keys did not work, although the universal key would open it. The head housekeeper tried to give me his universal key and was only dissuaded from this plan when I pointed out that we had 2 guests, and we needed 2 keys. I was then given a room back in the safe for occupancy area. Once I entered, I discovered someone else's stuff, because the room had already been given away to them. I was then given another room that appeared to be empty. This is room number 5, it was at this point 7:30 p.m. At 11 p.m., the manager still Denny opened the door to let in the 2 guests to whom this room had been assigned sometime around 3 p.m., who had not yet dropped off their stuff, and didn't understand why my fiancé was asleep in their room. The next morning, I spoke to Denny's boss, who comped my stay as would any sane person in the hotel industry. I'm tempted to give this review 2 stars to reflect that someone there knew what they were doing, but the fact remains that the carpets were randomly damp in spots, the tile floors were all sticky, the breakfast was a joke, the coffee grounds were the wrong size for the machine they used, meaning there was a 1/4 inch of grounds in the bottom of every 5-ounce cup, and between their inability to determine which rooms were occupied and the reckless disregard for the responsibility of holding a master key, I didn't feel comfortable leaving anything valuable in my room at any point. I was there for a convention, and I think they'll probably be there next year too, because it's a favorable deal for them with a lot of space. Next year, I will call and ask if Denny still works there. If he does, I will stay somewhere else. If he does not, I will give them one chance, because my understanding is the overboss is new, and actually has some interest in providing a customer service experience slightly above the level of guests giving up and asking whether they're being punked. 48. I moved across the country to live in my husband's home state with him. Our first summer here, his friend is getting married at a ski/camp resort, and since my husband was at the wedding we had to be there for 2 days per night. It should be noted we got married a few months prior, and this friend of my husband's was asked to be best man and agreed, kept saying he'd be there, but never booked his trip or anything, leaving us hanging and backing out last minute, didn't even acknowledge our marriage. Yet we're supposed to spend $700 on his wedding between the suit, gift, travel, and the overnight room. Well, we try to be the bigger people and go to support his day. Show up to the resort, pay over $400 for our room, walk down to the cabin, and the mother-effing bride and groom put us, a married couple where the bride knows no one in the state, a single room with 6 other people, all single men. And a communal bathroom. I was livid. We went back to the lobby, and I shamed the groom tactfully that it was an inappropriate arrangement, and for $400 I shouldn't have to share a room and public bathroom with 6 men I don't know. They gave us a spare room, which had not been cleaned, with a disgusting bathroom. We did our duty for the wedding day and left before daylight in the middle of the night. We have yet to see them past a hello at another wedding since. 49. Stayed in a hostel in Dublin. I mean, you kind of get what you pay for, but still. First off, there was the Italian Buddha. Really nice guy, but started chanting during meditation in a joined bathroom, which was strange to say the least. That was alright. Then there was the other guy, the most racist I've ever had the bad fortune to meet. Fat, middle-aged, bald, and pretty much the Irish version of white trash, with an accent thicker than molasses. Took him less than 10 minutes of conversation before he shared his ideas of shooting all the black people in the city. Still, this wasn't his worst trait. He went out drinking and came back again mumbling about killing black people before falling asleep. Then came the snoring. Pretty much like a lawnmower going over rocks. An alarming volume. That and randomly shouting. Barely slept that night.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.